Hey guys, Justin with Shock Therapy, and we're here to show you how to install a billet race rack on a Polaris Turbo S. This race rack will tighten up the whole steering system in your Turbo S and give you instant response without having any breakage issues in the future. This race rack is made out of the highest quality aluminum and hardened steel components that you can buy. It's also completely rebuildable in the future. No matter how you drive, this rack will outlast your car. The installation of this race rack should take between 2 and 3 hours, so let's go ahead and turn this over to Mitch so he can show us how to put it in.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It's Mitch. We're here yet again for another install video. We got a good one for you today, guys. The install of the race rack on the RZR Turbo S.
Step 1 is to remove all the shocks from the front of the car. Jack the car up until the tires are just off the ground. Always use jack stands for safety. Remove the front wheels and tires, and remove the shocks completely from the vehicle. Don't forget to unplug the factory loom. Make sure you mark the shocks correctly because they are side specific and cannot be mounted on the opposite side. Next, disconnect the sway bar links from the lower control arm. Make sure you save all the hardware and don't lose any of the spacers. Raise the control arms up on jack stands so that they are approximately at ride height. Disconnect both outer tie rod joints from the spindle. With the outer tie rod joint removed from the spindle, you can now unthread the tie rod from the rack. Disconnect the front differential sensor. Also disconnect the front diff vent hose. Next, remove the top differential support plate. Now, disconnect the hardware that holds the upper differential mount to the chassis. With the hardware removed, you can now completely remove the upper differential mounting plate. Remove the differential mounting plate on the opposite side. Next, remove the factory pinch bolt for the steering shaft to the rack. Now, remove the hardware that holds the factory rack through the rack mount. With the pinch bolt removed and all of the factory rack mounting hardware out of the way, the factory rack can be removed from the vehicle. Before installing the billet rack, make sure that the rack and pinion is centered by checking the rack gear distance on both sides of the body. It's also a good idea to center the steering wheel in the car. If you don't have someone that can hold this in place, then use some bungee cords to hold it centered while you install the rack. Slide the rack in place by first pushing it through the U-joint and pinch bolt. This is the area that must remain centered with the steering wheel. With the rack in place, you can start to install the new hardware which will attach it to the rack mount. Some of the hardware is very close to the front differential. It's easy to use a pry bar to move the differential side to side or up and down to allow extra clearance for this hardware. It's a good idea to use blue Loctite on all rack hardware.
So the lower bolts on the rack go forward, the shorter bolts on the top go back towards the car.
With all the hardware started, you can now tighten every bolt. last install the factory pinch nut on the lower U-joint.
Tighten on.
With everything tight, you can cycle the system back and forth to make sure you have no clearance problems in the chassis.
Perfect.
You can now reinstall both upper differential frame mounts.
Oh yeah.
Make sure that you feed the factory differential wire loom through the upper frame mount on the driver's side. Install the top support plate for the differential.
Loosely. Cool guys, so a little bonus tip, when you're going to put the main diff bolt through the cage to hold it up, use something, pry bar, screwdriver, maybe something with a protective end on it or something like that to pry the diff up so you can actually line the bolt up with the cage to push everything through.
Next, install the long bolts holding the differential brackets to the chassis.
All right guys, so in this part of the installation, it's probably recommended to have another person hold the other side of that long bolt that I just showed you that we put through the diff. If you go to impact one side, you're just gonna spin the whole thing. So we're gonna have Brandon come on in, give me a hand, and we'll get her done.
Do the one that's closest to the firewall first.
Reconnect the factory loom to the front diff. Also reconnect the breather line to the diff. Next, install the sway bar links to the sway bar. Remember that this billet rack and pinion requires aftermarket tie rods. You can use any tie rod of your choice. The most important thing when using aftermarket tie rods is that you keep the rod end installed in the rack the way we deliver it. Use the clevis that is supplied in most tie rod kits in the tie rod. Never switch the clevis with the rod end in the rack. Rod end stays in the rack, clevis stays in the tie rod. Install the tie rod joint onto the spindle. Install the opposite tie rod. Tighten the Centerlink hardware that connects the rod end on the rack with the clevis on the tie rod. Tighten the outer joints on the spindle. Install the front shocks, maintaining the correct sides. Don't forget to install the factory shock loom, otherwise the shocks will not perform accurately. At this point, make sure that you tighten the jam nuts on the rack and pinion that hold the rod end in place. Next, jack up the car and install the wheels and tires. Now remove the jack stands and lower the car back on the ground. If you have limit straps on your car, you will need to turn the car on, or at least the ignition, to cycle the suspension and settle it. Jack the car up so that the straps are straight when you tighten the lower bolt. Turn the ignition on once again and settle the car by turning it back and forth. Keep the steering wheel centered once you leave the car. With the steering wheel centered and standing in front of the car, you can give it a rough alignment by looking at the front tires compared to the rear. Adjust each tie rod individually to line up the front tire with the rears. Whenever you make an adjustment, make sure that the steering wheel is centered. Once the front tires are close visually compared to the rears, you can now set the toe in the front. We recommend 1/4 of an inch toed in. That means that the measurement in the front is 1/4 inch shorter than the measurement in the back of the tires.
48 3/4 dial. It's actually that.
Once your toe is set correctly, you can now tighten all of the jam nuts for the tie rods. With the jam nuts tightened, you can now slide the rack boot over the inner joints. The inner joint should be approximately in the center of the boot. You should have about 3 bellows outside and 3 bellows inside of that inner joint. Take your time when sliding the boot over the rack body. Once it's over the body lip, use a zip tie to keep it in place. With the zip tie cut to length, your installation is complete.
Mitch, thank you so much for showing us how to put that rack in. It's a little bit more complicated than a normal XP. We hope that your installation went just as easy as Mitch made it look on this video. Keep in mind that this race rack needs to be greased every 300 to 500 miles. Failure to grease the rack over time can cause it to run dry and prematurely wear. Another thing that we want you to watch is the wear of the boots on the end of the rack. Sometimes you can get branches and other things up in there that can cause a cut in the boot and allow dirt and debris to get inside the rack. If you have any issues like this, we sell the rack boots separate on the site and you can replace them at any time. Even though Mitch showed you how to do a rough alignment on the car, we always recommend that you take your car to a professional alignment shop to make sure that it's perfect. One final thing that we want you to be aware of: never remove the rod ends from the end of the rack gears the way we ship them. We find that it's common people take the clevis on their tie rod kit and switch it around with the rod end that's in the rack. Never do this, as it changes the geometry in the front end and will create bump steer. As I mentioned before, all the components for this rack are available separately on our website at shocktherapist.com, or if you have any questions on this or any other products, contact us at 623-217-4959. Get all you stop asking if we're ever going to have a rack for a turbo. Don't ever that on this thing.
Face when he doesn't know what to do.
That's my focus face.
Hey guys, Justin with Shock Therapy, and we're here to show you how to install a billet race rack on a Polaris Turbo S. Nailed the first sentence. It's a good sign.
Act like Sean.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. No, hang on. I forget what I said now.
This race rack should help you with longevity. This race rack will last, not prevent you from breaking, blah, blah, blah.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. It's Mitch again. We're here. We're going to show you how to install the race rack on the Turbo S. No, dude, see, I say it once and I forget it.
It's also completely rebuildable in the future, so it can outlast your car. So no matter what no matter what kind of abuse, no matter what type of driving style you have, this rack will technically outlast the time. No.
Remove with the wheels.
Remove at the wheels.
This wheel is black nut.
Chase,
The boot install is very last, okay? Don't forget it.
won't forget. Mental note.
Thank you.
Got a price?
Yeah.
Or if you have any questions on this or any other products, contact us at 623-261-35. No, that's my wife.